So by now you know a lot more about what the state governments can do and what the national governments can do. In our system of federalism, they both have power. And that's really interesting. It creates for some real advantages, and it also creates for some potential downsides. And that's what we're going to be exploring in this video, where we're going to be talking about some of the strengths and the struggles that come along with living in a federal system. And so we're going to be asking this question, which is, in the long run, does federalism help us or hurt us? Is it a benefit to us or is it a downside? I'm going to leave that up to you to decide by the end of this video, but we're going to explore both the upside and the downside. Now, why don't we go back and just first ask that question, which was, well, why do we even have federalism to begin with? Why does the United States have this type of system when we already know that most countries in the world opt for a unitary system? Why are we different? And I want you to think back to that unit where we were exploring the Constitution and its origins. And one of the things that came up there was the story of the Constitutional Convention. And we learned about the various factions that were present. You had some folks there at the Constitutional Convention who did not want to see major changes. They wanted to merely modify the Articles of Confederation. At the time, we had the system in the United States where under the Articles of Confederation, the states retained nearly all of the power. The national government was extremely weak. It couldn't really solve problems when states had conflicts with each other. And as we saw, there were a lot of calls to reform that system in the aftermath of Shays' Rebellion. And so you had some folks coming together to kind of talk about what that would look like. A lot of people that were there at the convention wanted the states to retain power in that sort of confederal system that we had before. But you had some people who totally disagreed with that, and they wanted to see a very strong, very robust national government. Now, neither side really got 100% of what they wanted. That's the case in compromises. You give up some of what you want to reach a deal that everybody can live with. And that's what happened at the Constitutional Convention. Essentially, the reason we have federalism is it's that compromise between people on the one hand who wanted a strong national government and others who wanted the states to retain the power. So there's some benefits that come along with it as well. Under that Articles of Confederation government, you really had almost like 13 different countries that were operating. Even though they were together under one national banner, it would really be more akin to like having 13 different nations because they had so much power over what happened within their state borders. Under federalism, we have now more national unity. When we think of the United States, we think of one country. Even though we're 50 states with differences across state borders, there are so many things that unite us and keep us in common. Our national government can solve problems that are shared by every state. So for instance, if you think about our national interstate system, if you get on the interstate, and you're driving around Los Angeles on, the 5 or the 10 or, any of these other freeways around here, those are called interstates because they actually go through multiple states. We have a national military that defends all of us, regardless of what state that we live in. And we also have federal laws that apply to all of us in all 50 states as well. So we can see that as a plus side, right? That national unity really does, in some ways, seem to be better than what we had under the Articles of Confederation. It also helps us to resolve conflicts between states because we have a national court system and so forth. But within that, there's still room for tradition. Think about Los Angeles and Los Angeles voters, and then maybe compare them to voters in a small town in Arkansas. They're probably going to have some differences, right? Maybe they're going to have some different opinions about the kinds of policies that should be adopted by government. And in our system, we have room for both of those communities to enact the types of local laws and policies that they would like to see. It's not all top down. Think about the different places that you've traveled to throughout the United States. If you've traveled much at all, you'll see that things are different. Different states have different property taxes, different sales tax. In fact, you go up to Oregon and you're not paying any sales tax at all. That's because people in Oregon have had that as part of their state tradition. So it's really, again, one of the benefits of federalism is that we at the local level can adopt local policies that really fit our local communities. And speaking of that, you couldn't adopt those laws and policies without local government officials. And so one of, again, the key ideas or the key benefits of federalism is this idea of access. It's going to bring the government closer to the people. And then let me give you an example of this. I want to ask you, first of all, I'm going to show you these faces up here. Do you recognize who these people are? Can you name any of them? Now, if you're like most students in LACCD, you probably don't know who any of these people are, but they're very important to you as a student, and that is because these are the members of the LACCD Board of Trustees. These are the elected members of government that make decisions for LACCD. They're making decisions that affect you. They're making decisions that affect the access that you have to different services on campus, the different instructors and faculty that are either hired or not, all the policies that we have throughout the LACCD and the way that the money is spent, all of that stuff at the end of the day is the responsibility of the LACCD. Now, I'm going to ask you a question. Let's say that you're a student of mine here at LA Harbor College and you end up running into some sort of a problem on campus. There's something that's really bugging you and you want to do something about it. Maybe you even already tried telling your instructor or the campus president and you don't feel like you're really getting anywhere. Now, I'm going to offer you two phones, okay? So option A is this phone right here. And if you pick up this phone, you can dial any of these members of the LACCD Board of Trustees. So this is option A. I got another phone for you here, though. This is option B. And if you pick up this phone, you can call 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C. And you could say, hi, yes, I'd like to speak to the President of the United States, please. I've got a problem at LA Harbor College, and I want somebody to help me out with it. Now, if you had to pick between these two phones, which one would you pick? Now, my guess is you're picking up the first option to call the trustees. How come? Because if you call the President of the United States, you're going to be waiting on hold for a little while. There's probably some bigger problems that the president has to deal with, right? And so when we're talking about that benefit of federalism, again, all of these different levels have responsibility. They have real decision-making power. And so that's really important. And so again, if you want to get your problem solved or if you want your local views to be represented, it's a lot more helpful to have somebody who's there in your community with the power to make decisions. So you're going to be picking up that first phone to call your local trustee member, and you're probably going to get a lot more help when you do. Now, this is a really important aspect of federalism. And sometimes I'll do this activity in my class where I'll ask students, I'll break students out into different groups, and they have to work together to brainstorm. And I'll ask them this question. I'll say, let's imagine that you are the governor of the state, or maybe you're the top leaders of your state. So in the way that this is set up, every single group is representing a different state in our classroom. And I'll ask them this question. I'm going to say, let's imagine that you wanted to bring productive young people and great businesses into your state. What are some of the policies that you would pursue? And without exception, every single time I've done this, all of the different states come up with different ideas. Some of them say, hey, we're going to drop taxes, make it better for companies to come in so that they can hire more people. Others will say, we're going to focus big on having programs that will help people through their education or maybe healthcare to attract people to move to our state. Now, this is actually happening in real time, actually in the United States as well. We've got 50 states, but they're all kind of experimenting with different policies. Now, the outcome of that particular activity is to show that you could have different groups that are going to come up with different ideas. And that's what's happening in our system of federalism as well. There's a really incredibly famous quote about this by a former Supreme Court Justice, Louis Brandeis. And he was a very influential Supreme Court justice. And he coined this term that a lot of people still use today when they're thinking about federalism. And that's the idea of laboratories of democracy. Let's read what he wrote in one of his opinions. About federalism, Brandeis writes this: "It is one of the happy incidents of the federal system that a single courageous state may, if its citizens choose, serve as a laboratory and try novel and social economic experiments without risk to the rest of the country." So what is he saying here? Well, first of all, I want you to imagine if you were in a science laboratory, what kind of things are you doing there? Now you see the image here, you've got the beakers and maybe you're in the lab. Well, you're doing experiments. You're trying to see what works and what doesn't. And so you might have an idea and then you test that idea out. And if it's successful, then you keep doing it. If it's not successful, well, great, you've learned something. So Brandeis says that our system of federalism is kind of like that. all of the states get to experiment with different policies. And when they do that, some of them are going to honestly suck. They're going to put this policy in place and it's not going to be very good. Now, even if that happens, well, first of all, he says, you're not putting your entire country at risk. You're just having one state out of 50 who's doing this. And so you're not going to bring down the whole system if one state makes up a stupid policy. But you're going to learn something from it because those other 49 states are going to look at that policy and say, that was a disaster. Let's not do that ourselves. But every once in a while, you're going to get a policy that's really great. That's working really well, that people really love it. Now, those other 49 states, what are they going to do? They might look at that same policy and say, we want some of that too. And so we're going to do the same thing. And not only that, but the national government might also say, hey, this is working really well in that state over there. Maybe this should be a national government policy as well. So laboratories of democracy is this idea that one of the benefits of federalism is that we can try things out and we're not putting the entire nation at risk. Let me give you a couple examples of this in the real world. Now, this is a picture taken in the late 1950s of Los Angeles, and it looks pretty bad to me. You see all that hazy smoke around City Hall? That is smog. If you've lived in Los Angeles for a while, you know that smog is definitely a part of our experience here, unfortunately. There can be smog on some days. And that was really bad for the 1950s through the 1970s, especially in Los Angeles. Now, if you're living in Los Angeles, sometimes on a clear day, you'll look up, you'll see those beautiful mountains there. Sometimes in the winter, you even have those snow-capped mountains up in the San Gabriel Mountains and so forth. It's beautiful. But believe it or not, back in the 1960s, there were a lot of days where you could look up into the sky and guess what? There's no mountains. Why? Because all you could see is smog. Kids had to stay indoors for recess. There were a lot of problems with asthma and so forth. And California began to experiment with clean air standards. Now, at this time, there were no clean air standards in any state or in the national government. California in the late 1960s starts requiring smog checks on vehicles, those cars that are ending up polluting a lot. Well, guess what? You're going to have to get that car fixed if you want to keep it on the road. California started making a lot of different policies that ended up getting adopted by other states and the national government. So, for instance, having a catalytic converter on a car. Catalytic converter is a part of a car that basically takes components like nitrogen oxide and it breaks it down into nitrogen and oxygen. It's going to reduce the amount of harmful chemicals and smog-producing chemicals that are coming out of the tailpipe. They used to not be required on cars, but California ended up putting that in policy. We also had special policies about, when you're filling up at the gas station, what kind of pumps they had to have so that you didn't have fumes coming out of the nozzle there. We also had in California policies and regulations regarding the air quality. Like if you had a really smoggy bad day, you would do a smog alert to let everybody know about it. A lot of these policies end up getting adopted by the national government. And so, California was a real leader when it came to air quality and environmental laws in this way. In fact, even to this day, California is seen as a kind of a leader in environmental policy. So this is going to be one really clear example of a state experimenting with a policy and actually having good results. In California today, we have better air quality than we did in the 1960s, even though we have 3 times as many cars on the road. So these laws in many ways have been a success for Los Angeles and the rest of California. And because they've been successful, they've also been adopted in federal law and policy as well. Now, another example of this that's currently happening right now has to do with the topic of cannabis policies. Now, some of you know that cannabis is technically illegal at the national level. So, if you look at the national government policy, it is considered an illegal drug. But in California, you wouldn't really know that walking around because you drive around and see a billboard on the freeway for a dispensary, right? It is recreationally legal for adults 21 and over. So how did it come to be this way? Well, in 1996, California was, again, the first state to legalize medical marijuana. At that time, even though it was illegal nationally, the state said, hey, if you can get a letter from your doctor stating that this would be medically beneficial to you, then you can have it on your person. You're not going to get arrested. You're not going to get cited or fined. And other states began to follow suit. In 2012, Colorado and Washington became the first states to legalize it recreationally for adults. And then other states like California, years later, would end up adopting that same policy. If the national government wanted to, think back to the supremacy clause, right? If there's a conflict between state law and national law, who wins out? We know that it's supposed to be national law. So, how is this allowed to happen? We see a conflict there. The true reason is the national government, there's no political will for them to do it. If they were to come in and start really getting severe on enforcement of these laws, you'd probably have a lot of people who were unhappy at whoever politician that was and maybe not vote for them in the next election. So do they have the power to put this to an end if they wanted to? Yes. Are they going to? Probably not. Why? Because they want to get elected. But that's besides the point. This is really an example right now of where you have a policy idea that's being adopted by some states and not by others, and we're kind of seeing how it's turning out. There are some advantages to loosening cannabis laws. For instance, more revenue coming in to the state in the form of taxes, less money spent on law enforcement and our court system in terms of, enforcing those laws against cannabis use. But of course, there are some downsides too. And there's research that suggests that there has been an increase in mental health related problems, especially for people who are frequent users of cannabis products. We have issues with potential road safety if somebody's driving under the influence, or even community safety if somebody is, using these products in public in a way that could potentially lead them to do something unsafe. And so this is really, again, an area where we're kind of seeing how it's going. States are going to go one direction or another, and maybe that will even lead to federal governments making decisions based on what they see. We've talked about some of the upside, and we haven't spent much time talking about some of the downsides, but there are downsides to federalism too. And so on this slide, we're going to talk about some of those key areas where people criticize our system of federalism. And one of the big ones has to do with competition. In this system where we have 50 different states all setting their own policies, there really is a sense of competition. We call it competitive federalism that's going to compel states to compete for businesses and for residents. Why do you want businesses and residents? Well, you want your state to be powerful and you want your state to have a high quality of life. You want jobs for the people that live there. And state policies are really going to determine where people choose to live and do business. In recent years, we've seen some states moving out of California because of some of the regulations that we have on businesses in our state and maybe higher taxes, and folks relocating to other areas. There have been some big tech companies, for instance, including Tesla, that have moved their headquarters from California over to Texas because of a more favorable business climate. And so that's really going to shape and constrain the kind of laws and rules that those states are pursuing. Now, related to this entire topic of competition is another criticism of federalism that has to do with something called the race to the bottom. There are concerns that in this system where you're trying to set state policies to attract businesses to your state, some states might try to make a very favorable set of business policies on businesses that may lead to other negative consequences. So maybe you make it a little bit easier for business to operate, but in doing that, you lower your environmental standards, or maybe you lower the protections that are in place for workers. Now, after all, that might make it more appealing to businesses to move into that area, but it might have a negative impact on some of those quality of life issues that people are facing in their jobs and in their communities. So that's something that is considered as well as a potential negative of federalism. The last negative that we're going to talk to has to do with inequality. If you look across state lines, there are major differences in the kinds of social services that are provided and the type of funding that is provided for things like education. In a unitary system, you would expect to see a much more sort of level playing field across all the various parts of your country. And if you look at a map of, say, education funding across the United States, you'll see that some states spend a lot of money on education per student, while other states don't spend that much. And so that's going to lead to different resources and different outcomes potentially on issues like education funding, public services, public health. These are all going to be areas where we're not going to see sort of uniformity, but we're going to see a lot more variation. And sometimes that can mean that some places are doing a lot better than others when it comes to really helping people meet their basic needs. So, in some ways, federalism is a mixed bag, but guess what? So is everything else. We're going to have some things about federalism that are really great. That idea of laboratories of democracy and getting to experiment without putting the whole country at risk. But there are also some downsides that we're seeing here. Things like competition and potential race to the bottom, worries about inequality. These are all things that are also going to come as a result of our federal system as well. I hope that in this video you learned a little bit more about why we have federalism, what are some of the benefits, and what are some of the cons. I'll see you in the next video.